they basically told me, like, you've been through worse. All this is gonna be okay. And one of the squid people, like, kind of gave me, like, a thumbs up. Like, it's okay, bro. Like, everything's gonna be okay. And at that point, I'd realized they had strapped me into some kind of, like, roller coaster. And dude that gave me the thumbs up, like, kind of, like, hit a button. And I was propelled through this geometric palace of just wonder.
The following video does not glorify drug use, but instead it intends to promote harm reduction by discouraging the ignorant use of specific drugs, as well as harm elimination by discouraging certain people from using specific drugs altogether. There is no right or wrong way to consume these substances, but there are unsafe and safer ways, and what's more comfortable for one person may be more dangerous for another. Before watching this video, please understand that psychedelic experiences may not be entirely predictable, but that doesn't mean that bad trips and good trips are random. Rather, it means psychedelic experiences are influenced by factors such as the individual's given setting, and dosage at that specific point in their life. Therefore, you will not experience what these people have experienced, but you could potentially experience something similar. However, these are random people, so please do not make decisions based on what they say without your own due diligence. And also, take note, once again, that these substances affect everyone differently, especially those with pre-existing mental conditions.
So in line with what happened with my relationship, I was going through a very difficult transitional period in my life with regards to, like, my job and how my company at the time, specifically my supervisor, who was one of my good friends, actually decided to start targeting me and made my life hell for about 6 months. It was a very difficult transition out of this company. There were, in line with the relationship, it was going on pretty much at the same time I was starting to experience difficulties in my previous relationship. But I want to say this was about 8 months ago. And yeah, I had just gotten to a low point where I was just not necessarily more depression, just overwhelmed with stress and being unable to just logically process through all the trauma that was happening. And so about 8 months ago, 8 or 9 months ago, I had a dose of DMT, again, in my little safe space that I always partake in, the sacred medicines. And this dose, I would say, was about 40 to 50 milligrams, higher than my last dose, but still about the mid-range. I had intentions of just not really even, again, not going for a breakthrough dose, but just wanting enough to, like, dip my toes in the water, like I like to say, and possibly get some insight. But unfortunately for me, I'm not sure exactly why, but this small quantity, whether it's because of quality or how I had prepared for the experience, I know I had been extremely fasted, adequately hydrated. I'm not sure exactly, again, why, but it ended up being a substantial breakthrough dose. In line with my last description, the squid people were there again, and in this experience, they had done what they always done, which they didn't do in my last experience, which is they did some kind of, like, surgery on my brain while talking to me, just telling me, like, hey man, like, everything's gonna be okay. And following their surgery, they basically told me, like, you've been through worse, like, all this is gonna be okay. And one of the squid people, like, kind of gave me, like, a thumbs up, like, it's okay, bro, like, everything's gonna be okay. And at that point, I'd realized they had strapped me into some kind of, like, roller coaster, and dude that gave me the thumbs up, like, kind of, like, hit a button, and I was propelled through this geometric palace of just wonder. I toured essentially what was the kingdom of the starfish people, or not the starfish people, but the squid people. And I just had, like, the time of my life, and it was like all the stress and anxiety I had been experiencing from work went away. And at some point in the experience, the ride came to a stop, almost at, like, a pillared train station. And the only way I can describe it is, I'm not sure if people remember that cartoon from the 90s called, I believe it was Gargoyles. I'm not sure if it was a Disney show, but it was like a combination of one of those gargoyle characters and this thing called a Balrog from Lord of the Rings. And it was like a combination of it, and it came, like, flying from the distance out of the geometric palace area down to this geometric substation, and it landed there. And naturally I thought I would be like afraid of it, but it didn't have like this negative scary vibe. It somewhat introduced itself to me and said, like, basically like, hey man, everything's gonna be okay. Like, you know what you need to do. You don't need to be afraid. You just gotta have the courage to go forward and do what you need to do. And at first I didn't really understand what he was talking about. I was just more impressed with like, who is this gargoyle Balrog man? And somehow I came to understand during the experience that like this was like kind of like my shadow self. And I'm not sure if it was because at the time, with especially the types of therapies I was going through, I had been learning about like shadow self and how to do shadow work. But this creature, almost in an instant, I realized this is like my shadow self, and it was trying to empower me that, like, hey, like I'm your suppressed self, and I'm telling you what you need to do so you can have the strength to do what is necessary. And at that point, I started to leave that dimensional area, and he kept just telling me this message, like, you can do this, like, you got this, man. And when I returned to baseline and was back in the physical world, I spent a lot of time that day and days following trying to just understand what the message actually related to. And about a week later, I realized that, now I kind of get it. It's my, I was basically my shadow self, if you want to call it that, was telling me that, it's time that I have the courage to just leave this situation and not be afraid of the future. Because I had a lot of hesitancy about leaving the job because it was just getting so toxic. And in that moment, I knew, like, hey, I can do this. I don't know what the future holds, but it's not worth staying in an environment that was killing me just because I was afraid of what the future held, and that I can do this. And then it did take some time because of certain complications, but through what I learned of that experience and certain situations that happened following, I did get the strength to finally accept that, my health and my sanity were more important than staying in a toxic place just because I was afraid of what the future held. And I found the courage to finally leave. And yeah, since then, certain aspects of my life got substantially better. And in moments when, like my relationship, when, I miss certain aspects of the good aspects of the job, I always think back to that experience, that there's no need to be afraid, because what's more important is your health and your sanity. And you don't need to worry because, just stay on this path, whatever path you're choosing right now, and the future will be brighter. You just got to have the hope to stick through it.
Do you have anything else to say in regards to how else that trip impacted you, or whatever long-term effects you've had, or how those long-term effects have held up since then?
With regards to that specific trip, the most interesting part of it was, again, at the time I had been looking into, through my therapist at the time, I had expressed interest in doing shadow work and, identifying my shadow self. For those who don't know what that is, it's related to Jungian psychology, on how developing, you have to identify the shadow aspects of yourself, those suppressed aspects of yourself, that often manifest in negative ways. And it's usually like that suppressed aspect of yourself trying to break forth, and it manifests for different people in different ways. But I've since then I've pondered why my shadow self manifested in that way. Like, it was just like this gargoyle creature. It wasn't angry or negative. It was very stoic in a way, but it just appeared terrifying. And in trying to explain this to my therapist, the best way I could, what I got out of that experience was that the darker aspects of myself that need to come forth and integrate with my personality don't necessarily need to be, this what often people describe as their shadow selves. It's a part of myself that is strong, but it doesn't necessarily have to be nasty and angry. And in line with that, that entity that I encountered kind of fit like a blueprint for the type of, I wouldn't say perspective, but just the type of attitude and mentality that I wanted, just that like that sense of stoicism. So in a way, it kind of provided like an example of what to achieve for like myself, if that makes any sense. Just the nature of that entity with being very stoic, very powerful in appearance, but not in a threat. I mean, I guess initially when I experienced it, it appeared threatening, but it wasn't overtly threatening. It was just appeared powerful, but at the same time very stoic and very peaceful on the inside. And I found that very admirable. And since then, again, I've had other issues to deal with, but it always resonated with like, this is the type of person I should be, where everything going on around me in my environment, like to just be as stoic as that entity I encountered, and be as powerful but not overtly aggressive. And so that was the main thing that came from it that still stuck with me to this day.